Unaware of her true identity, the restaurant manager expels an elderly woman, appearing downtrodden like a beggar, from his establishment. Life remains in flux, never consistent. An eternal cycle of change underscores the need to be perpetually open and compassionate to those in our midst. Indeed, the times when assistance may be required by oneself are unpredictable. Andrew, a 17-year-old boy, worked part-time in a very expensive restaurant near the town where he lived. As a young man, he was responsible for his younger sister and his sick mother. In the morning, he would go to school, and in the late afternoon, he would go into town to work until evening. The money he earned was barely enough to live on, but in spite of this, his behavior made him one of the nicest waiters, who was always friendly with the customers and played with the children who came to the restaurant. One day, while Andrew was performing his duties and carrying an order from one part of the restaurant to another, the door opened and an old woman walked in. Her gray hair was covered with a wet handkerchief, her clothes were torn in several places, and she was a little dirty. The woman leaned against a chair near the exit and tried to catch her breath. In the hallway, a disgruntled man began to whisper, and visitors began to badmouth the woman. Unhappily, she could not tear her eyes from her embarrassment and finally began to walk, trembling and stumbling until she reached the nearest table. She said quietly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I haven't eaten anything today. If you can?" But before she could explain her situation, a bald man dressed in a suit appeared nearby, grabbed her by the shoulder, and pushed her towards the door. She stumbled twice, but the angry man didn't care at all. The old woman fell down and couldn't get up. Her legs were shaking, and now she had to walk down the stairs. Then she began to walk down the street, looking through the glass doors of the restaurant. She observed how warm it was inside and how many people came there to warm up with a cup of coffee. Gathering strength, she got up and went to the alley where there was only one entrance from the back. At that moment, the restaurant manager, the same one who, in a few minutes, threw the poor woman out of the establishment, apologized to all the customers of the restaurant. He even went so far as to offer a dessert as an apology. Andrew, who was present in the room during this ugly scene, decided he had to do something for the poor woman. He ran out of the back door of the restaurant and found the old woman. The young man reached into his pocket and pulled out the only money he had earned that day. Things were not going well for him, and expenses were getting higher and higher, but at least he had a house to go back to and food. So he walked up to the old woman and put all the money in her hand. She looked back at him and saw the kind face of a young man smiling at her. The old woman fixed her gaze on the boy's eyes and burst into tears. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "That is the kindest act anyone has done for me in the last few years." A week later, Andrew's life was still the same. He went to school, helped his sister, took care of his mother, and worked. He tried to be his usual self, maintaining good relationships with his coworkers and smiling at every customer. At that moment, the doors of the restaurant opened, and a very elegant woman wearing a wide hat and costume jewelry entered, along with other equally well-dressed people. She was wearing a long black skirt that matched perfectly with a white leather jacket. The woman clearly had not only a lot of money, but also great taste. She sat at the best table in the restaurant, and soon the manager himself approached her. Not knowing what else to do to please the important customer, he called Andrew to immediately attend to any request from the customer. With a smile, the manager handed her the menu, and she noticed how the man tried to flatter her. She smiled back. The manager told her about the restaurant's best dishes and offered to personally bring her order. Surprising everyone, the woman replied, "I'm sorry, but I would not like to be served by such a superficial person as you." The manager looked at her with resentment and asked her why she said that. The old woman, who was looking at the menu at the time, looked at the man and began to explain her behavior. "I was very scared and confused. I was a victim of assault a few meters from here. So I went to this restaurant for help. I wanted to stay in a warm place until my children came to pick me up. After that, I realized that I had hired people who do not feel even a little sympathy for those who need help." The manager immediately remembered that day and how rude he was to that old lady. He felt extremely embarrassed and asked her for forgiveness, to which she replied, "Don't worry, I accept your apology. But you must understand that I can no longer have such a heartless person running my business." The woman was silent for a second. Then she turned to Andrew, smiling at him. "It is people like this young man that I need in my business. What is your name, young man?" "My name is Andrew," he replied. "Then Andrew will be the new manager of my restaurant chain. I am very happy to have you as my manager." The young man remained in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the unfolding of events. Expressing gratitude for her generosity, he waited until he was alone, at which point tears streamed down his face. The realization dawned on him that this newfound role could pave the way to cover his mother's medical expenses and fulfill the needs of his family. Following the comprehensive training for his elevated position, Andrew seamlessly transformed into a highly efficient and amicable manager. Initiating a thorough restructuring of the team's operations, his efforts resonated throughout the various branches of the restaurant chain. Gradually, the eatery gained popularity, drawing an increasing number of patrons. In its entirety, this journey enabled Andrew to carve out his niche, ensuring the provision of all of his family's necessities. His actions stemmed from a place of integrity and affection, an embodiment of assistance rendered when it was most needed.